Welcome to part 64 of my video series on how to use Blender 2.7. In this video we're going to be finishing off this mini-series on how to create from scratch a LEGO character by talking about character, in other words, performance or body animation. If you've not seen the rest of this video series, I'll put a link to all the videos on the screen right now and in the description area below, and I'll include a link to this playlist of this mini-series so you can watch it from start to finish all that much easier. If you would like to download this exact file that you see on your screen right now that I made, complete with the entire LEGO character, all of the character's materials, all of the textures for the face, including all the mouths and the eyes applied to the character, and of course the focus blur set up on the camera so you can have that depth of field blur that makes it look like the character is small. All of that will be in that exact file, the same file that I have on my screen right now. You can download that in the description area below if you would like. Of course, I would recommend creating it yourself from start to finish if your intent is to learn how to use a Blender. Let's go ahead and jump in. In order to make character animation easier, I'm going to divide my screen up a little bit more. Right now on my screen I have several windows. I have a large 3D viewport window, I have a timeline at the bottom, I have an outliner window, a properties window, and an information bar at the top. I'm going to make my timeline just a little bit taller. I'm going to grab the top of it and drag it straight up. I'm going to split it in two vertically. So I'm going to grab this little triangle crosshatched area right there, and if I left click and drag straight down on it, I can split this window into two copies of itself. And now I can change this window type over here with this button to a Dopesheet window. A Dopesheet is sort of an old-fashioned animation term. It's actually a tool used in traditional drawn or stop-motion animation, where on a large piece of paper, an animator or animation production team would plan out a scene by sort of saying, hey, the character needs to maybe be over at the right side of the screen or camera frame at frame 1, and then by frame, let's say 72, the character needs to be sort of at this pose, maybe facing the other way, and then at frame 87, the character needs to have turned to face the camera, and then at frame 98, the character needs to have his arm up and begin waving, and then wave from frame 98 to 182, whatever it is. They actually plan out their animation ahead of time at sort of a wide scope in terms of a whole scene before they actually start animating. That's what this Dopesheet editor window is sort of based on. You get a wider scope and you can actually zoom out by dragging on the right side of this scroll bar to get a wider kind of scope of your scene, and it shows all the keyframes of all the objects in your scene. And so this is for basically making the planning a draft or the key poses or the rough pass of your animation when you first get started. But before we start animating, I'm actually going to divide this Dopesheet window into two. So I'm going to grab this little cross-hatched triangle area again, and this time I'm going to left click and drag it to the left, like that, to divide it horizontally. I'm going to change this window over here from a Dopesheet window into a graph editor window. A graph editor window, and we'll get to why we're using it in a moment, is good to see kind of the interpolation, and again we'll get to that, of our animation. I'm going to make it a little bit narrower though, and the kind of sidebar of it a little bit narrower as well. To get started on animation, I'm going to turn on my red record button down here that will automatically insert keyframes whenever I move or rotate or scale an object. But actually, I'm not going to be scaling this character at all, so I'm going to save Blender some resources by clicking in this area here and selecting the kind of keyframe that we want to automatically insert. Instead of all of the kind of animations, location, rotation, and scale, LocRot scale, I'm going to select just LocRot for just inserting location and rotation keyframes on any object. Again, we're not scaling. So now with this red record button turned on and LocRot selected, I'm going to move my character to where I want him to start. So with the hips parent bone selected, actually it's not a bone, it's just a piece. I'm going to put my character up to right about there, and I'm going to rotate him 90 degrees or negative 90 degrees on the Z-axis so that he's facing the direction he's going to walk, which is to over here. So I'm going to tap R and then Z and then -90, and I'll tap enter. So now we have a keyframe at frame 1, that's where our playhead was, of our character facing this direction at this location. In fact, I'm going to make this a little bit easier for myself. I'm going to use this grid that you can probably see if you're watching this video in high def on YouTube. I'm going to move it so that his heel is touching the line that's right there, the grid line that's right there on my screen. Perfection. This is where we're going to block out our animation. That was the word that I was looking for a moment ago. That's what the Dopesheet editor window is for. It's good for blocking out your animation and for then going through the passes of your animation. In other words, going through again and again and making the animation better and better by refining your animation, looking at where things are and correcting things. So I want this animation of my character walking from here to take 72 frames. That's what I need for the length of my overall animation that I'm not really making here. So I'll go to frame 72, and you'll notice that the playhead lines up in all three windows. We're at 72 on the timeline as well. And I'm going to move the character's hip section, not bone, over to right about there, so that his toe is touching the 0 mark on the X global axis. Right now, I just noticed that the gizmo is set to local, and that's why the gizmo's green Y-axis is pointing this way, while the global X-axis is that same direction. So I'm going to change my gizmo to global like that. Let's go ahead now and go back to our first key pose. We have blocked out sort of the animation in the most primitive way, but at frame 1 I want him to already be in mid-stride, so I'm going to grab each leg, I'll tap R, I'll move my mouse, and I'll put him in sort of a walking stride position like this, and maybe correct it just a little bit. Now, if your legs are like mine, you'll see that your legs, or the tippy toes of your character, or the heel, might go through the ground. Right now we don't have a ground, and that's okay, but you can imagine the ground will be at this red line, 0 on the Z-axis. So I might need to move my character up and down a little bit by grabbing his hips piece. So maybe right about there. So we have him in a good starting pose. Let's move along a little bit, maybe to frame 8 or so. And at frame 8, I want him to be in sort of a passing pose. That means that his planted leg, the one that his weight is on, will be straight up and down like that, and that the other leg will be just sort of passing, and we're going to decide here that it's going to be a little bit forward so we can tell the difference and select the two legs more easily. So at frame 8, you're going to notice here, and I'll make this window taller, that we do not have a keyframe on cube.001, which must be the hip section. What I'll do here is I'll collapse down these three object tracks so that we're not seeing more keyframes or little diamonds than we need to. So we have a few keyframes here. We have no keyframe on frame 8 for the hips, and that's okay because the up and down looks okay. For now, I might fix that at a later time on a later pass. Let's go to the next stride pose. So at frame 8, we're at passing. At frame 16, I'm just sort of kind of spreading it out at this rate, and we can change the whole scale, the whole speed of our animation later on. That's one of the powerful things about this window. So at frame 16, I'm actually going to select that planted leg, because that planted leg is going to stay in the back. It's going to be the back leg when we're at our next sort of stride pose. So at frame 16, and again we're going to have to change the position of the hips so that our feet don't slide around. So that back leg's going to be right about like that, and that one's going to be right about like that, and I'm going to try to make it so that the toe is going to be not going through the ground. What I'll need to do here now is reposition the hips piece so that our feet don't slide. Let's go ahead and look back at where that planted leg was just a moment ago. If I look at this first keyframe at frame 1, this is the planted heel. That's where the weight is going, and that heel should stay in the same spot until it's no longer the planted leg, until this leg takes on the weight of the character. So if I scrub through to frame 8, well, wait a sec, that heel was there, now it's sliding back like he's walking on ice. So at this frame, I'm going to have to make a position for this hips piece, and I'm going to move it forward so that the heel of that weight-bearing leg stays in the same position. So it needs to be right about there, so that that weight-bearing leg won't be sliding around. Now, that's one of the neat kind of things about this 3D cursor, is that you can position it and just sort of use it as a reference for where things need to be. The heel should not be sliding around It should stay in that same kind of planted spot. And now that this leg is now kind of flat on the ground, the weight's going to transfer over to the front or ball, or in this case, the toe of the foot. So I'm going to put this 3D cursor by left-clicking right about there. And now when the character rotates into its next kind of splayed or stride pose, it will stay in that same pose, but as you can see, it slid forward. So I'm going to grab my hips piece and slide the character back. So now hopefully that toe stays in about the same position, and I might need to go through, because it's sort of interpolating in a funny way, I might need to go through later on and kind of fix where my legs or the hips bone is to make it so it doesn't slide around so much by kind of making a keyframe halfway in between. There's one thing here I can fix though, and I should have mentioned this a few moments ago before I started animating the legs, and that is if I look at the speed of my character at the beginning and end of this 72 frame animation, the character is going to speed up and then slow down. If I play it, you'll see what I mean. The character starts slow, it speeds up, and it slows down. Let's go ahead and see that again. It speeds up, it's fast in the middle, and it slows down at the end. And that's because of the interpolation mode that Blender sets by default, and that's why we have this graph editor window here. You can see now that these lines, which represent the character's movement, this red line is the x-axis over time. If you have a curved line in terms of your location, again over time, that represents when it's curved, your character is not moving at a constant or linear rate. We can fix that by changing the interpolation mode of our keyframes by pressing A a few times with your mouse in any of these two windows, so that we have all the keyframes selected. Then I can go down to Key and go to interpolation mode, and that's the T keyboard shortcut, so you can bring that up just by pressing T with your mouse in this window or this window. It's the same thing over here, key, interpolation mode, T, same thing. So I'll press T, I'm going to select, instead of Bezier, that's the default, I'm going to select linear. When I do that, you can see all of the curves now become straight lines, and that means that all of our rates of motion are constant. They're linear. They don't speed up and slow down or ease in or ease out. So now if I press play from frame 1, you can see that my character kind of moves at a constant rate. But of course, we've slowed the character down here so that it doesn't slide around. But now we can keep going, and now we'll know that he's moving at a constant rate. Okay, so we have the character in a stride pose with his right leg forward. We have the passing pose. We have the next stride pose in the opposite position that we have it in frame 1. We just need to make one more kind of keyframe here, and that is the opposite passing pose, just like that, but the opposite one. So here, the load-bearing leg or part of the foot has become this heel. So I'll put that 3D cursor right there. In fact, I'll zoom in so you can see what's going on there. And it's not quite on the ground, that's okay. I'm not going to be that picky. Again, I can go through later and kind of fix those things up. I'm going to go to the next iteration, which will be frame 24. And I know that heel needs to be in the same spot, I believe. So I'm going to select that hips piece, and I'm going to slide it back so that heel's in the same spot. But actually, I need to rotate not rotate the hips, rotate the leg so it's pointing up and down, because this is the next passing pose. And now I can position the hip so that not only is the foot exactly on the ground, I'll move it down just a little bit here, but also that the heel is in the right position, so right about there. So now hopefully the character will not slide very much. And again, I can put it in between frame when I do my next pass. Okay, that leg is not correct at all. I can put it maybe just a little bit forward compared to the other one. We're looking pretty good. I now have all the leg positions that I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm only going to select the keyframes of the two legs, in this case cylinder 1 and cylinder 2. So I'll press A a few times to make sure everything is deselected down here. I'll press B. B is the keyboard shortcut for box select, and when you press B for box select, your mouse gets these little dotted lines going through it horizontally and vertically. So now I can click and drag and select in a box the keyframes of cylinder 1 and cylinder 2. In fact, why did that happen? I selected everything. There we go. I only wanted to select these bottom ones. And of course, if you have anything selected down here, it selects the summary keyframe 2. Don't worry about that. So now what I can do is this first keyframe is the next pose from this passing pose. So I'm going to press Shift D, and Shift D will make a duplicate of all the selected keyframes. I'm going to move it down to frame 32. Is that frame 32? That's 33. I'll move it down one more just with the G key. G is grab or move. Great. So now we have a kind of even spacing of these keyframes. And if I continue playing it, you can see that I have my leg motion and the character's position is continuing to change because of this keyframe down here. So that doesn't mean that it's right though, because my character is probably doing a lot of sliding. There are no proper keyframes set, but at least I have my walking animation. What I might do now is I might just duplicate all of these keyframes again. I'll press A to deselect all. I'll press B to bring up my box select. I'm going to box select all of these keyframes here, not the cube, which is the hips piece of the character. I'll press Shift D on my keyboard with my mouse in this window, Shift D, and now I'll position it right about there. So now I have this constant walking happening, and I can just sort of later on, and I'm going to actually fast forward this once I get started, I can correct the sliding of the character's feet. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go to the next keyframe. I know that, let's take a look at this actually. At frame 16, this becomes the pivot or the load-bearing foot. So I have my 3D cursor right at his heel. At the next frame, we know it's going to transfer, or it's going to transfer over to his toe, right about there. At the next frame, oh boy, look at that. He slides quite a bit. So now I can correct that location of the hips. At this point, the heel becomes the load-bearing section of his body, so I'm going to slide down to there and go to right about there. This back leg is the one that should stay in the same spot. It's at this point that the toe becomes load-bearing, so we'll put the 3D cursor there, and now I can slide that back like that. So I'm just going to fast forward to this next part. You'll notice that my animation is way too long, and what I might do then is judge how far I've gotten, and I can scale this animation, and we'll get to that in just a sec, but I'm going to fast forward this next section of the video. Alright, so I've finished going through the animation of my character walking, and I've repositioned the hips piece of the character so that the character's feet don't slide around so much, and it goes at a constant rate at all the keyframes, so we're doing pretty well. I made too many keyframes because I just duplicated a whole bunch of the leg keyframes, so I have, as you can see, the character keeps walking, but we're already at that point where the character is just past that 0 mark on the x-axis, so that we don't actually need these keyframes anymore. So I'm going to press A to deselect everything in here. I'll press B to box select, and I'm going to select all those keyframes and press X and click on delete keyframes. So now I have an animation of my character walking from point A, which is all the way over there, to point B, which is right at this location. I've gone just a little bit past because now I'm going to animate the character kind of jumping up and landing, because that's how I guess a Lego character would move. It's sort of a very animated fashion. By the way, don't worry about the fact that we have this up here. I've already turned off in my outliner window the plane and plane.001, so we actually can't select it at all. If I try, I can select that light, but I can't select these planes, and they will not render out because the camera is grayed out there, so we're doing okay. If you want to not see them at all, you can press the eyes, and that way they'll go away. Okay, so I want my character to jump up, and again, we're going to be blocking out the animation here, so right at about here, I actually don't want the character to go up straight away. I want him to go down a little bit, so I'm going to go a little bit later, and I'm going to have him go down a little bit, which means I'm going to have his legs sort of rotate backwards, but right now I'm just blocking out the location and maybe the rotation of his hips parent piece. So at that point he's going to be a little bit down to emulate a little bit of squash. That's one of the principles of animation. I'm going to go a few frames later, and I'm going to move the character up like he's jumping to maybe right about there. I'm going to rotate him on the Z-axis, so I'll type R and then Z on my keyboard and rotate him a little bit like that. And now at frame, let's say, 124, I'm going to rotate him. I'll press R, and then I'll press, actually, I'm going to press Escape. I'm going to press Alt-R. Alt-R will clear this character's, or this piece's, rotation, because we know that we modeled it from the front view facing us. So that way I don't have to actually rotate it kind of manually and figure it out. Alt-R will clear the rotation, and now I'll put the character just at his landing post exactly where I wanted him to be. Right there. Now I know at this frame, at frame 124, I want his legs to be flat on the ground. And then we'll actually do a little bit of squash there too. So I'll press 3 to go to my side view. I'm going to reset the rotation of these legs. So I'll press Alt-R, and I'll select the other one, Alt-R, to clear out the rotation, and to set, when I do that, a keyframe. And so now we have, let's go ahead and play it actually, an animation of the character jumping up and down. If I don't like the speed of any of that, I can move these keyframes around just by selecting them and pressing grab. But what I'll do right here, because we don't want any crashing between the legs and the ground, is this leg that I have selected right now will actually keep going forward a little bit. So I'm going to slide that so it's just sort of like that. And then this one will slide back like he's doing a funny kind of splits before he goes up in the air. And in fact, when he's in the air, because this is a cartoon, I'm going to rotate it, and again I can just press R because of these constraints that I have over here that I set up when I was just finishing off the character. I can just tap R and that will rotate the leg in the way that it's supposed to go. So right there and right there. In fact, I'm going to go really sort of exaggerated like that. And of course, once I go through and add the arm animation, it will look more like it's supposed to. I might even go here and rotate that in sort of a funny way. I'll press R and then X twice to rotate the character on his X axis, and that's just the hips piece that he's kind of doing kind of a funny splits in midair. And then he's going to land. Now right about here, I think I want to rotate the character's legs a little bit. Let's press R. Again, this is supposed to be a funny kind of cartoony animation. I'll select the hips, I'll press R and then X twice to rotate him a little bit forward. And then when he lands, I'm going to have it be straight up and down, but I'll press R, X, X to rotate him a little bit. And he would probably just do a little bit of jiggling after that to kind of like steady himself. So I'm going to go a little bit later, and I'll press R and then X twice, and let's make him go a little bit down. And then I'll go a few frames later, R, X, X, and then back a little bit. And then I'll go a little bit later, and I'll press Alt-R to clear out the rotation. So now I'll kind of like jiggle a little bit when he lands. Those little details really, really help. So I've got my character walking from point A to point B, and then he jumps and lands. And of course, that's pretty bad animation, but now I can go through and kind of refine it and refine it and refine it. Animation does take a lot of time. The last thing I'll talk about here is scaling animation. Right now, my walk animation takes too long. I said 72, and that's what was dictated on my dope sheet. That's how long it needs to be for the length of my overall scene that I need and to fit in the length of my TV show or movie or what have you. It's going too slow right now. So I'm going to go all the way up to frame 101. That's where my animation needs to end, but instead of it ending at 101, it needs to end at 72. I'm going to press A to deselect all my keyframes in the Dopesheet editor window. That's one of the strengths of the Dopesheet editor window. You can select all the keyframes or deselect. I'm going to press B to box select. I'm going to grab and select all of these frames by clicking and dragging, including 101. And now I'm going to put my playhead at frame 1, and I can tap S for scale. And yes, I can scale the animation, and it scales towards your playhead where you currently are. So if you have your playhead over here and you tap S, it'll scale towards the playhead. So I want to make sure it's at frame 1 because we want to scale down towards the beginning of the animation. So S. And now I can make sure that this frame, the last frame that was at 101, ends up at 72. Is that frame 72? No, it's 71. So I'll tap S and go one frame later. It'll try to do its best to line up each of these keyframes with an actual numbered keyframe. Now it's frame 72. That's the length that I wanted. So I can press A to deselect all, B to box select. I'll box select these ones and move them over. And so hopefully at this point I can play my animation. He'll walk faster. It'll look like just as good of a walking, in fact probably even a little bit better because it's fast. And he'll jump and he'll land and kind of wobble a little bit. That's a pretty terrible animation, but as you can see, this is the process that you go through, or at least I went through, to make my Lego animation, which I'll bring up on the screen right now. This is the actual file that I rendered out of my Lego animation that you might have seen on my channel last week or at some point since I posted it. If you have not seen this animation, it's a very short one of my Lego character actually singing "I'm a Little Teapot." I'll put a link to that on the screen right now and in the description area down below. So if I scrub through this animation, you'll see a few things. You'll see that the camera is zooming in a little bit there. Yes, it is. But more importantly, just focusing on the character pauses at certain points. So I'm actually going to reorganize these windows just a little bit. I have a sequencer up here just for the audio. I don't need that, so I'm going to dissolve it by grabbing the little triangle area and holding and then dragging back into itself. And so now I have a Dopesheet window. If I select each part of the character, you'll see that there are some points shown by these darker lines where the character actually stays still, or that part of the character stays still. You'll see that right there. There is a pause. And if I select the hips, you'll see more of these. There are pauses where I want to show off what pose the character is in. That happens many times when the character bends down, when the character is just sort of kind of shaking back and forth there. It's important to add in pauses, and of course to do that you can select any keyframe and press Shift D to duplicate it and move it to later so that you get an area or time of still motion of that object. Otherwise, if your character is always moving, that just will look a little bit too fast moving, and you won't ever really get to see and kind of absorb what the character is really doing. Believe it or not, animation has a lot of pauses in it, especially a stylized character animation. So you're going to find that the more pauses you sort of add at key points, the character freezes at one point when he notices the camera's there, and you see him kind of stopping and staring for several moments. That's a pause. It's important to add in. It's also important to mention that this animation did not happen that quickly. This animation is only about 18 seconds long, yet it took about 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 hours to do. I'm not a very experienced animator. I've done some animation just as a hobbyist before, but again, it took about 5 or 6 or 7 hours all in all to get all of the animation done, including the mouth and the body, and that happened over several passes of refining and deciding what my character was actually going to do. I didn't really plan it out all that well. But that will be it for this video. Please don't forget to like this video if you learned something. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to see more tutorials just like this one in Blender and in tech. Please check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borencg. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye-bye.